Council members Manukian.
Here.
Jarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Friedman.
Here. Can we hear your report, please?
The agenda for the December 6, 2011 special meeting of the City Council was posted on Thursday, December 1st, 2011 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Before you is a public hearing, Director of Community Development and Public Works regarding proposed ordinance amending Title 12 and Title 30 of the Glendale Municipal Code 1995, creating standards and procedures to permit pedestrian signs on public right-of-way and on private property, to allow creative signs in the Montrose Shopping Park, and to adopt fees for pedestrian sign permits. At A is an ordinance for introduction, amending sections of Title 12 and Title 30, and adding sections Title 30 of the Glendale Municipal Code 1995 relating to pedestrian and creative signs. And at B is a resolution adopting new fees for engineering-related services and permits regarding pedestrian signs.
Thank you.
Mayor Friedman, members of the council, I'd like to take up with a little house cleaning items first. I've passed out to you a slightly revised version of the ordinance. There was a typo in the title related to section 220. It really should read 215. On in section 2, which should be on page 2 of the ordinance, there was a item A that may have been left out of the ordinance related to application fees. And finally, on page 10 in section 5, under E2, we slightly revised the language about how we're defining the types of merchants associations that will be eligible for pedestrian signs. It's a very minor rewording of how that can work. It's trying to make it a little bit more clear. In addition, the exhibits of the signs that are attached to the sign ordinance did not get into your packet, so I've distributed those to you. On March 22nd, the council authorized staff to prepare standards for the pedestrian signs. Pedestrian signs are intended to attract pedestrians, not drivers of motor vehicles. Therefore, staff has prepared standards that would make them not allowed in certain more auto-oriented portions of the city, which is really much of the city. There are only 5 pedestrian-oriented shopping districts where we think that this should apply, and the maps of those areas are in your packet. The permits a permit would be required annually in the amount of $100. The signs would be allowed on public right-of-way only within these commercial districts. And if we can go to the next, let's see if I can do it. There we go. Downtown Specific Plan Area, Montrose Shopping Park, Spar Heights Merchants Association, Kenneth Village Merchants Association, the Adams Square Business Improvement District. Those are the only areas where signs would be allowed on public right-of-way. They would only be allowed to be a 4-foot tall A-frame sign. They'd be allowed to have 1 sign per ground floor business. They could change the sign face periodically. For example, they could have a chalkboard, but they can't have a dry erase board. They would not need to get a new permit for those changes. The frame has to be made of a high-grade material, weather-resistant material, and plastic frames would be prohibited. They can only have them out during hours of operation. They'd have to be at least 24 inches away from the face of the curb. They can't be attached to anything. They can't block a pedestrian or traffic. They can't create traffic hazards, and they must maintain a 4-foot pedestrian through path. And just like for sidewalk dining, they have to have $1 million in liability insurance at the time of application. This is an example of the kinds of signs we're talking about that would be allowed. A-frame, either metal, wood. And these are the examples of the kinds of signs that would not be allowed. If they have individual letters, that's not allowed. If they're plastic frames, that would not be allowed. And the goal in developing these standards was to come up with something that was attractive, would not create too much visual clutter, would be safe, and would be aesthetically pleasing. So we moved away or shied away from the plastic frames and the individual letters. And we decided not to use allow taller pedestal signs. That was in an original proposal because we felt they might be unsafe during high winds, for example. For signs on private property, all the same standards would apply. In those situations where a business has some private property behind the public right-of-way. That's the intent. But they would only be allowed in those cases in the downtown specific plan area. We felt like that was the only area where there was enough of those situations where businesses had some private property behind the right-of-way where it would make sense to allow them. And we felt like it would be more manageable if we kept it to that area rather than allowing them on private property in other parts of town. Again, we've modeled these not only after examples from other cities, but we've also used the sidewalk dining standards as our guide for developing the standards for these pedestrian signs. I just wanted to talk about public outreach just a little bit. We conducted meetings with all of the merchants associations affected during the summer in June and July. We also gave notice to the various homeowners associations of the Planning Commission in this meeting and to the Glendale Chamber of Commerce and Montrose Verdugo Chamber of Commerce. We've not received any objections from the homeowners associations or from any of the chambers that we've talked to. There was some discussion and debate when we met with the merchants associations about what the fee should be and things like that. But generally, we had support from the merchants with the direction that we've proceeded. That's the discussion of the pedestrian signs. Also before you are some rules, a revision in the rules for creative signs. Currently, creative signs are only allowed in the downtown specific plan area. It was our understanding that it was always the intent of the city council to allow them in Montrose. So before you is a minor change to the provisions for creative signs to also allow creative signs in Montrose. Creative signs and pedestrian signs are two separate items, but because we're modifying the sign ordinance, we thought now was the appropriate time to present that to you. That concludes my staff report, and I stand ready for any questions.
I have a question. Is there any rule about the distance these signs can be from the establishment?
No rule about that, but they do. There's a rule that says they have to be directly in front of the storefront.
So what if is it only the first floor storefronts? What if there are stores on second floors? Can they also?
As currently worded, only first floor storefronts that have a door entrance to the right-of-way would be eligible for a sign.
So a strip mall, could they do it?
Most strip malls could not do it. But if the end business happens to have, many strip malls are either L-shaped or straight, if the businesses on the ends happen to have a doorway out to the right-of-way, theoretically they might be able to have one there. But most strip malls would not be eligible either because they have second story or because their ground floor businesses are separated from the right-of-way by a parking area.
Okay, so we're not going to have a public right-of-way that has 10 signs in a row?
I don't think so. The one place where we've said that you can have multiple signs is if you've got a private walkway, like at the Exchange, that private sidewalk that intersects the public right-of-way, you can have signs in those locations. There could be multiple signs in those locations. We think that those situations are limited enough that we could probably live with that. Couldn't think of another way to allow it in the marketplace in the Exchange and not prohibit it sort of entirely, but yet sort of we recognize we're probably going to have to live with 4 or more or several signs in those limited situations. But it's staff's opinion we could probably live with that since there are very few that would probably qualify under our provisions.
Are there any questions before I go to the public? Okay, I have 2 cards. Lorraine Mohill, to be followed by Mike Mohill.
Madam Mayor, would you open the public hearing before you take testimony?
I'll open the
please?
public hearing.
Thank you.
No longer the afternoon. So, good evening, Councilman Friedman and council members. I am here to speak about signage in Montrose. I have a real estate license and worked in property management for over 20 years before retiring a year ago. My position entailed working with tenants at different properties, about 10 properties, with all the tenants around Southern California. One of the big problems was tenant signage. Everyone wanted more exposure, and it was impossible to satisfy everybody. During the last 5 years in particular, when the economy sank, all tenants needed some kind of assistance, whether it be retail concessions, lowering rent, free rent for a time, and of course more business exposure. Signage was definitely not the answer to what they needed. In fact, it caused more problems than it cured. Montrose is a special, quaint, unique town. Cluttering the streets with signs would destroy the ambiance of this beautiful place, to say nothing of the problems that would ensue. Signs would wind up blowing away like the other day. Of course, it's unusual with these heavy winds, but certainly the signs would have blown away. Uniformity in letters and coloring would always be a question. Some tenants, and this has happened to me, some tenants would put up unprofessional signs waiting for their professional replacements. In addition to that, liability insurance is financially prohibited for most of the tenants, in my opinion. They're just eking out a living right now, so for them to be able to qualify for that insurance would be most difficult. And this is not a reason, what I'm going to be saying, for why I'm against it, but also the hassle factor for the city. Who's going to be verifying the insurance requirements for the tenants? There'll be questions from all the tenants on city permits, sizes and lettering questions, fee questions, sign and location questions, continuous phone calls to the city with questions regarding filling out paperwork. This is not in any way, in my opinion, worth the hassle and manpower for the city to take over. But most importantly, the deleterious effect on our special town is something of my concern. I think it will open up a Pandora's box. What we did at the company for whom I worked was to allow the tenants to put up at certain times during the year, one being between December 1 and December 31st, banners. Any one of them could put up banners, as well as on the other holidays, July 4th, Memorial Day, Labor Day, they could put it up for a week. And they had a certain period of time when they had to remove it. It would be in a lease or an addendum to a lease that each tenant would get. They all could put it up at a certain time. You certainly can have sign criteria for the banners, but that's something that the Montrose Merchants Association should deal with. In my opinion, this is something the city should never be involved in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mike Mohill?
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Mohill. Thought my wife would be a good person to speak on this issue on the signage in Montrose and so forth. She loves Montrose very much. I'm here talking about winners and losers when it comes to preference. Why would we, in the first place, want to charge the merchants this $100 fee? Why don't we charge people who ride their bicycles in the city of Glendale $100 a year? We've spent thousands of dollars lining the streets of Glendale for a few hundred people who want to ride their bicycles. Call it 1,000. Charge those people $100 each. Why would you want to charge these merchants? I think it's about time we start charging the people who ride our bicycles on our streets. We've paid, taxes are paying for those streets, that paint job. And again, getting back to the merchants, I think my wife comes from a place of being there. She's talked with tenants. She knows how they react. She was in it for 20 years. And the first thing I told her about this sign stuff and the sandwich board, she says, Mike, horrible, horrible idea. Having banners, she said, would be fine a couple times a year for a few weeks at a time. But she says, don't get the city involved with this. Let the Merchants Association be in charge of this. The city has enough problems. The last thing they want to be is be a policeman when it comes to signs. Thank you for your time and consideration. My name is Mike Mohill.
That's my last card. I'm going to close the public hearing. Are there any comments from council?
I have a question. Is it, in the body of the report, it says no closer than 18 inches to the back of the curb? In the ordinance itself, it says no closer than 24 inches.
Yeah, it was intended to be 24 inches. That's because of the age of the report. It never got changed.
It still has to have at least a minimum 4 feet
Yes.
Passageway.
Yes. So there may be locations where they won't be able to have the sign, despite of all the other regulations, because they can't provide adequate a path past whatever obstructions might be there, fire hydrants or trees or whatever.
Okay, that was my question.
Are you saying that there's 19 conditions on here, and we're going to make sure the 19 are followed, And the property owners want this, right?
The merchants associations, I understand, do want this in general.
In general. Were they excited about getting it?
Some were excited. Some were a little concerned about, in the earlier version, we had a couple different kinds of signs, options. Some merchants wanted fewer options. Some merchants, frankly, some of the smaller merchants wanted more options. But in general, they were enthusiastic about the ability to have these kinds of signs.
19 conditions.
Mr. Quintero?
Well, this to me is a little more important than the balloons in terms of sales.
Think so?
But I don't know. I'm not too thrilled about it, quite frankly. Yeah, it's kind of nice if you're walking by a restaurant and they have a sign that tells you the special of the day, or something to that effect, or maybe even a retail shop, but I don't know. I just don't know that this really makes a big difference in terms of sales or anything else. I mean, if you're walking down, and these are specific areas, Kenneth Village or Montrose or whatever, I mean, you can't turn to your right or left to look in a store. I mean, there's signage. I don't know. If the merchant associations are for it, then I suppose there's some validity, but I'm not particularly enthused about it.
Same here. I know you go down to the wharf or something, walk out on the wharf, and there'll be signs sitting outside advertising, but it's a whole different atmosphere. It's not downtown Brand or the main streets. I feel like Mr. Quintero, I'm just not totally comfortable with it.
Mr. Finucane?
I am in favor of it. I just think staff has done a good job in terms of what should be allowed and what should not be. And some of the signs that are allowed, if you've kind of done the ordinance according to what the pictures that you have, I think if they're going to have quality signs, that could certainly add to the atmosphere of the business and can certainly help it. I just like the visual part that you've shown here, and I hope that the ordinance reflects it. If we can help the businesses, these.
Well, you got it in color. We got it in black and white.
Right. Well, in color it looks good. And,
It looks a lot better.
Yeah, and it just the quality of the signs I think is important. You certainly don't want to have. Yeah, this is questionable, but these two are really nice. Certainly, you don't want to have these plastic things on there. I'm certainly opposed to that. But these two on the sides that are really nice, wood, done in very good taste, I like, and I think if businesses are able to do that, why not? Help them out.
In the frame they would buy in Glendale.
Yeah.
Mr. Najarian?
My concern is an occasional sign along the sidewalk would look attractive. However, we're leaving this open to every single business that has a storefront that would meet those standards to have a sign. So potentially you could have every single business with just a myriad of signs going down. And I think that would detract from the impact that a occasional sign would have, but also be cluttering and be intrusive to the pedestrians. Not so hot on it.
I have a question from the staff. I'm just curious. Is it mostly restaurants that would be interested in this so they can put a menu of the day, or does a retailer also want to?
Well, we've heard from restaurants that they were interested. We also heard from, for example, Massage Envy downtown, that they would like to be able to have sale items, specials, out there on the sidewalk. So it's not just restaurants. I'm sure other merchants who have sales and specials going on would want these out there.
Comments?
I'm not going to make a motion. That's
Well, let me make a suggestion. I don't know if this is practical, but maybe we pass this and set up a time in the future to review it and see how it's been working, to review it with the merchants associations and see whether it's cluttered, whether it's been causing pedestrian traffic jams, whether it's working out as everyone had intended or whether people are starting to be resentful of their neighbors. Maybe that would make council feel a little more comfortable.
I know one thing, 2 items on the agenda tonight are the budgets for Montrose and Adams Hill. Is there anything to stop us from asking them? I mean, that's after the fact, unless we took this off calendar week and ask them in the
Well,
budget.
one of them is an ordinance for introduction, so
It'll be coming
You're gonna have
back,
to
but
bring it back
I know that
anyway.
I'm pretty sure the merchants associations are all supportive of this.
I'll introduce the ordinance, just so it's introduced.
I'm going to ask tonight on the budget.
And we should
Madam
ask,
Mayor?
yeah.
And I think it's important to note that in the last 3 to 4 years, we have been approached by the merchants on and off regarding these A-frame types of signs and the importance for some merchants to be able to utilize them based on the economy. And we have had to go down the path of code enforcement at times with neighborhood services, and so this seemed to be something that could work for both the city as well as the merchants. And your idea of trying it out for a period of time to see how it actually works out once it's out there is a good one, to see if council would be willing to do that.
Except there'll be an investment that they'll have to make on the chance that it might not last.
That's true.
Yeah, but I don't think it's that huge of an investment to do.
Well, do we have a ballpark figure on the insurance, the $1 million? I wonder what that.
Who pays
Code
for
will
that?
require $1 million.
Yeah, but I'm wondering what the cost is going to be
And
to
some
the
of those
individual.
businesses,
Depends
some of
on the
them already
business type.
have it, I would think, if you're a
You know,
restaurant.
this gentleman.
We have a speaker.
I'm Bill Ahern. I'm from Public Works Engineering. I do the sidewalk dining, and I handle the insurance for that, and we're going to use the same insurance requirements that risk management provides for sidewalk dining, and that's $1 million. I think it's a combined coverage. So there wouldn't be any difference between the coverage, the insurance coverage for the sidewalk dining and for the proposed signs.
Yeah, no, I meant the premium. I wonder what the premium might run for.
That I don't know. My understanding from talking to the restaurants for the sidewalk dining is that there is a charge when they go to their insurance brokers to get the certificate of insurance, and there's also an endorsement requirement too that's a part of the risk management's requirements that they have to fulfill.
Well, that might help limit some of the signs to people who really feel that they need them. Thank you. I mean, my feeling is that I'm willing to give this a try. I think that there are certain businesses where this could be very helpful. For instance, a bookstore that wants to put that they have a children's reading hour at 4 o'clock today, where it's really hard for them to get the word out about that otherwise, or a restaurant that has a special. Whereas a business that has more of a static kind of business where things don't change from day to day, they may not see so much of a need for this, and they may not pursue it. But I'm comfortable with giving it a try, and I'm fine with setting up a date certain to review this, if council would support, if that would make people feel more comfortable.
Like Mr. Weaver said, we can also ask.
We could. Well, the ordinance has been introduced at this point.
Do we need to move on the resolution? Is it to?
I'm sorry, who introduced?
I did.
Thank you.
You can hold the resolution over until the,
Let's bring the resolution back when we vote on the
I
ordinance.
have a feeling this came out of Montrose, I think.
But there's no sunset, we can't do sunset clauses, right? I think we had discussed that before. We can't have it automatically expire only to be revived by another active.
You mean the zoning part of it? It's difficult, especially with respect to structures, to say you can allow them to do something and then take it away. But because this is it's something we could look at, I think what the mayor was suggesting, and I think that probably the way to do it is to adopt the ordinance and then have staff come back on a date certain as far as how that particular provision is working, and then we can look at modifying it at that
Kind of like a
time.
moratorium kind of thing.
Reverse moratorium.
Okay, so the ordinance has been introduced. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And for the benefit of the public, we are going to be starting at least 15 minutes late.
We have actually one more